Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The left is just relentless when it comes to writing and rewriting history. So we had the White House Correspondents Association dinner last weekend, weekend before last, at which point the argument was made, and it was repeated on the Sunday Talkies, Chuck Todd and others, podcasts and so forth. That was the time for the press to absolve itself. We should have asked more questions, but we were duped by the senior leadership of the Democratic Party. That's their cover story. They just rinse and repeat relentlessly to hope that becomes the official record. And for those senior members of the Democrat Socialist Party that were flacking for Biden both inside and outside the White House, well, you know what it is. You know what their cover story is. And they persist in telling it because they have an interest in persisting. Here's California Governor Patrick Bateman, who also goes by the name Gavin Newsom, being queried by the BBC on Biden's cognitive decline.
I never had, period, full stop. I would be lying to you, and I won't lie to you, as it relates to the direct engagement I had with Joe Biden that ever suggested a cognitive decline to the degree that we saw at that debate night. And so that was a challenging moment. And of course, over the course of the next few weeks, that moment became a monumental decision where he decided to pass that baton.
Mm-hmm. The one thing Gavin Newsom will never do is lie to you or anybody. That's the one thing he refuses to do. Talk about a punchline. Jen Psaki. It's interesting how this always happens in sort of groups. One person feels the need to rewrite history to benefit themselves, and then others act in concert to do the same. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki.
I never saw that person, not a single time, and I was in the Oval Office every day, that was on that debate stage. I'm not a doctor. Aging happens quite quickly.
Not a doctor. Just like Ketanji Brown Jackson is not a doctor, so she can't tell you what a woman is. Jasmine Crockett, the it girl of the moment.
People tried to talk about the mental acuity of Joe Biden. And as someone who was able to interact with him, I never questioned his mental acuity.
Mm-hmm. They saw nothing.
Nothing. I hear nothing. I see nothing.
Alex Berenson is the author of Pandemia, How Coronavirus Hysteria Took Over Our Government, Rights, and Lives. His Substack, Unreported Truths, at alexberenson.substack.com. Alex, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure.
Just that do you find it curious, sort of these fits and starts where certain members of the press and then certain members of the Democrat Party establishment feel the need to revisit the Biden trajectory in the last 6 months of last year and make sure that everybody has their understanding of it. Meanwhile, but the press and the senior leadership of the Democrats are clearly at odds with one another. But again, they're both trying to cover their backside, so that's understandable.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're seeing is there are books coming out now where various people are being, some people are being honest and some people are being less honest about what they saw, right? So you have Pelosi, being quoted as saying that she was concerned. You have other top Democrats saying they're concerned, and why they're doing this is there's probably internal stuff happening at the top of the Democratic Party that we don't really know. It could be anything from grudge settling to trying to position yourself for 2028,
right,
to trying to get in good with some donor who warned you about this. I mean, right? They're all playing games with each other. The games have very little to do with the truth. And the truth, Robert Hur told us the truth last year, right? He told us that Joe Biden was a well-meaning, I mean, maybe that part is not true, but we'll say it is, well-meaning man with with a poor elderly man with a poor memory. And that's been true for years. Anything else is not true.
The same thing goes on. I mean, just the approach they take, because we're talking about people more or less of the same ilk, is just really interesting. Because the same thing is still happening with COVID, and I assume it will persist, particularly as more information, more studies come out, and there's more uncomfortable results, at least from the perspective of the Covidians. But I saw a couple of posts just last week. Matt Iglesias, man on the left, supposedly a leftist intellectual. I don't subscribe to that description, but popular on the left, supposed to be a thinker, saying, all this stuff about Fauci and school closures, Fauci wanted the schools reopened, and he cites some clips in the New York Times and elsewhere where Fauci and other officials says we should get the schools open as quickly as possible. So that means Fauci really pressed to have the schools open. Another one is Garrett Jones, who is a econ professor at George Mason. The romantic right is convinced that the masses were on their side during COVID, that only the elites were in favor of mask mandates and lockdowns. And he cites a poll in April of 2022, a year after mass vaccination, where a majority of Americans supported requiring masks on airplanes and public transportation. Yeah, I don't think that was actually the position of the so-called, he calls the romantic right, I would just call the anti-Covidians, that a majority was necessarily with us. We just said it didn't make sense. And I'm not surprised a majority was with the Covidians, because they had endured 2 years of fear-mongering and propagandizing relentlessly about masks and shaming, and people were being canceled for not wearing masks and not following every Covidian mandate, standing in their idiot circles and whatnot. But I just found this really interesting, too, this coming out now, where you have to reestablish that masks were popular and that people that sort of paid lip service to not closing the schools were for keeping the schools open. That seems to me all part of rewriting.
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting because you talked about Biden and sort of the truth about Biden and the press not being aligned with the Democratic Party. The press still isn't telling the truth about COVID, right? So the press and the Democratic blob are still one on COVID. And so that's why you see this very grudging acknowledgement that school closings were a disaster, but really nothing else. They're still fighting about lockdowns. They're still fighting about masks. They're still fighting about vaccines and how many trillion lives the vaccine saved. The country, I would say, I think in May 2022 that poll is right, but the country has taken a look back. I mean, the best thing that happened for those of us who said this was all completely overdone was that everybody wound up getting COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
And
even if you were vaccinated, yes.
That's right. So a lot of people who were vaccinated realized that the vaccine side effects that they'd suffered, forgetting even potential long-term ones, but the short-term vaccine side effects they suffered were worse than COVID. And people who weren't vaccinated got COVID, and certainly if they got Omicron, for the most part, they shrugged it off in a few days. Obviously, there were people who got much sicker. But, to this day, I don't really know anyone, and I'm in a position to know, I don't really know anyone who wasn't quite sick before getting COVID who got quite sick as a result of COVID. And I think that's where most people are. And so, I mean, it is interesting, for the last few months, last winter, there was a real effort to make bird flu a thing. Mm-hmm. And, the country just was not having it. People are very suspicious right now of the public health establishment. And that is not going to change no matter how much they're lectured by, the New York Times.
Well, the bird flu popped up during the presidential race.
Yep.
Just in time, just before in October, they were trying so hard to get it out there, and it didn't work. But you mentioned in your piece and one of your Substacks that the COVID lockdowns persuaded younger people to swing right. Can you explain?
Yes. Yeah, so this is fascinating. People in sort of 18 to 25 right now are as conservative as they've been in generations. I mean, more conservative. It's hard to find data looking back 100 years where young people are this conservative. And it's very clear that, part of it obviously was it's frustration with DEI, and boys are tired of being told how awful they are. But even women are more conservative. They're not as conservative as men, but they're more conservative than they were. And it's very clear that these people or these kids, they got a year, in some cases 2 years in states like Illinois or New York of normal school taken away. They got told that they, in some cases, had to be vaccinated for this thing that they knew they were at no risk for. They had to wear masks, and they've come to the conclusion that, I'm from the government and I'm here to help is one of the three great lies. And I don't think they're going to forget that. I think that this is going to be a change in politics that's going to last a long time, that young people who typically are pretty liberal, this generation of young people is clearly conservative.
I wanted to get to another piece that you penned about that D.C. jet crash, the jet and the helicopter. What we learned about it in terms of the culpability, particularly against the backdrop of a couple more close calls over the weekend at Reagan. And you take the New York Times to task for its coverage. Why?
So this was fascinating. It's been a very interesting couple of weeks for me on the Substack because this piece also got a lot of attention and frankly deserved it, because the New York Times a week ago Sunday did an investigation, a reconstruction of the crash, which, as we know, a helicopter hit a jet just as it was landing, at Reagan National. And sent that plane into the Potomac, and almost 70 people died, and the 3 people in the Black Hawk, they died too. And so the Times writes this, this monster story. There's 4,000 words, 2 investigative reporters, a lot of work, and they go into everything that sort of set the conditions for the accident. And a lot of it's actually very good reporting, except what they don't really point out in the piece until near the very end is what actually caused the accident was that the pilot of the Black Hawk was flying too high, was warned by her co-pilot, who actually was training her on this mission, that she was flying too high. Now, she outranked him, but he was technically the senior pilot, and so could have taken the controls, didn't take the controls, and she just flew into this plane and killed everyone. 67. And that's the news. 67 people died, and the Times, they got this, they locked it down, and they didn't write the story that way. And you have to ask, if this woman had been a male pilot, would the story have been told more clearly and with more the blame put where it really should have been put? And by the way, she wasn't just a female pilot. She wasn't that experienced. She worked in the Biden White House, and her main credential that was mentioned in her obituary was that she was a sexual harassment advocate in the Army. So you put it all together, and it's impossible to know what happened in that Black Hawk in the minutes leading up to the crash. Although there may be some voice recordings that we don't have yet, but there's a real story here, and the Times sort of submerged the real story. They didn't hide it completely, but they submerged it in all the background, and that's what I wrote on my Substack and on Twitter or on X in a post that got 8 million views. And so the heartening thing to me is that the sort of alternative media now is so powerful and has such a big reach that if I write that and I say, here's what the Times didn't tell you, more people are going to see that than are going to see the original story.
Well, and the whole thing, too, that artifice that they use is to say, we mention that, but as you say, it's buried so as to not get people thinking about the right questions that need to be asked and the answers that need to be provided.
Yes, it's not lying. It's just framing the issue in a way that doesn't get you, as you say, to the right questions. And is the real issue here one where a male officer or a male warrant officer who was outranked by the pilot was unwilling to challenge her? If that's the thing, maybe there needs to be some change in the way the Army and Air Force are handling these training flights. That's a good question. The other stuff that the Times raised, they raised important issues, but they didn't ever even begin to ask that question.
Alex Berenson is the author of Pandemia, How Coronavirus Hysteria Took Over Our Government, Rights, and Lives. Again, his popular Substack, Unreported Truths, which you can read and sign up for at alexberenson.substack.com. Alex, thank you as always.
Thanks for having me, and I'm hoping to come out to Chicago this summer, and I hope we can do it in person if I do.
Oh, that'd be great.
That'd be awesome.
All right. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
At Straight Talk, we are all about no-brainers. Calling grandma for her recipe, no-brainer. Streaming one more episode at 2 a.m., big no-brainer. Getting real unlimited data where you buy bananas, the ultimate no-brainer.